Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Kong Film Podcast episode. Now, it has been a while since I did a Kong episode lately, and I think it's been months since I did Godzilla X Kong: The New Empire, which I did with the gang. But now I'm back to doing more Kong film episodes. And today we will be talking about the classic 1976 remake of King Kong by Dino De Laurentiis. And we have a very special guest here for today. And he's done a lot of Kong episodes on his channel, and he's a big fan of him. So please welcome to BigJackFilms himself.
Hello! This is like
How's-
my third or fourth stream this week. How you doing?
I've been doing great, Jack. How you been? I mean,
I've been doing great. I've been working a lot on a few projects. Obviously, Jurassic Park has been on my occupation. Might be doing a new Kong review down the line, but I figured for the occasion, not only would I be here to talk about the 76 remake, which is my favorite movie next to the original, but I am wearing a vintage Confrontation t-shirt. This is back in 2000. And in the back, it says Wimps. I don't know if you can see that. It says Wimps in the back. But figured it's the closest shirt I have. So, yeah, I'm happy to be here, man. It sounds great.
Yeah, and that's really cool. I even had my fan art of the Confrontation banner style.
That is still like the coolest banner. I know one of the original banners still exists. It's owned by, I think, a private guy, a collector who does events for veteran Universal employees down in Orlando.
Like this one.
Yeah, I think he's got that one. That's the one he has.
Yeah, except it has the little tram thing. I mean, thing, and yeah. But I did give you a copy of my fan art, but add you to it, and
it was absolutely gorgeous. It actually hangs up front and center with all my fan art on my kitchen wall. I actually have a whole collage of fan art sent to me that I actually have on my kitchen wall that I just put up there, and it's right in the center because it's probably the best piece in the whole collection. So your artistry is amazing, man. It's absolutely fantastic.
Thank you. And I'm really looking forward to do this episode with you, and I've watched a lot of your Kong episodes that you review over the years, and I was hoping I got to get to meet you someday, and we actually did at G-Fest this year. And
yeah, we met twice. It was really cool because I've been going to G-Fest a lot more, and because I now have people I can go with, and I'm gonna try to come back again next year. But yeah, this year and the year before were absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, and this year was the best one because I actually did my first panel there. Talk about
really? I don't know. I wasn't there for that, but I'm sure it was great.
Yep, I actually did the Return of Godzilla from '84 for his 40th anniversary year.
Nice.
And if you want to guys check that one out, be sure to click in the description down below, which I'll edit soon. So we would be talking about the 76 remake of King Kong, which I have right here, the Blu-ray.
I couldn't pick a copy because I have it on almost every format except Laserdisc. That's the one I'm currently after right now. But I have it on VHS, multiple copies, Betamax, DVD, Blu-ray, 4K. I even have it on CED, which is the format that was rivaling Laserdisc, and it came on 2 sets I got with the original. But that's how dedicated of a fan I am. I should hang on. The one thing I will show that will be part of this podcast. This is an exclusive to you. Bring this out. But it's your podcast talking about this movie. It'd be appropriate to show this. I've shown this off before. I have in my hands, this is for all the audience members, a screen-used prop from the film.
I knew you were going to bring that.
This is a screen-used... I mean, we'll bring it up in more detail later, but this is a screen-used prop from the Robot Kong used in the third act of the film. And so this is an Academy Award-winning piece designed by Carlo Rambaldi. It's made out of resin. but this is actually King Kong's tooth I'm holding in my
Oh,
hand. As you can see,
I
like,
am so jealous. And
it's huge. And if you look how big it is, imagine how big his mouth is. Like, that just puts in perspective, just one tooth, how big his mouth is. This guy would eat you whole. So
that is like amazing. I mean, I can't wait to get to that detail that later on. I mean, when we get to that part. I mean, so yeah, so yeah, I would love to talk about the 76 film and and like in my previous episodes, we would talk about how we discovered this film for the first time. I mean, like from our childhood, like way like before you became a huge fan of it. I mean, so Jack, I'll be asking you, like, how do you discover this film for the first time? Like, try to remember, like, before you became the phantom of this film. Like,
well, I kind of know what my first exposure was because, ironically enough, it wasn't this film I saw first. It was actually the second film, King Kong Lives.
ah,
My uncles who got me really into filmmaking because they work in the film industry here in Toronto. They had brought in a bunch of VHS tapes from the video store for us to watch. We did a quadruple marathon. We watched the first two Jaws films, and then we watched the original King Kong, which I loved and is amazing to this day. And then we watched the sequel, King Kong Lives. And the transition from like that to color, at first I thought King Kong Lives was sort of a sequel that was like in the 80s, but it was like they had to kind of retell the events of the first movie for an 80s audience. It's almost like Kong's been in a coma. Instead of being in a coma for like 10 years in the sequel, instead it's been like 60 years. And I don't know, and that's how I saw it back then. I started this feeling of, oh, this is a sequel set in the 80s. Okay. But then it wasn't until, I mean, I was kind of exposed to it here and there through obviously visiting Confrontation, being on the ride. They used to have footage of the movie in the pre-show for the WWR news report. And then on top of that, watching, I see a lot of parodies of it back in the day. What was it? The Chipmunks did a whole homage to that particular movie back in I think their last season. But for me, I didn't really get really invested into it until, like everybody, the Peter Jackson remake came out. I came to watch more of the original film and loved it. I rented it at a local video store on tape. This is still, you could still use VHS back in the day. And then as I gradually was learning the history, I did watch the 76 remake again, and I came to enjoy it more, and I came to like appreciate it more as time went on. Now, what really got me more interested in it is I find my favorite movies always have the best making of stories. Sometimes if your movie has enough of a story about the making of it that's as fascinating as the movie itself, you've got one of my favorite movies. And Kong 76 has that, where I read a lot of books. I read Ray Morton's book, The History of the Movie Icon, which you should read. That is like the Kong Bible in terms of history. But then I picked up things like the Pocketbook that came out in the 70s. And I read through all this information. I'm thinking this alone would be worth a movie, like a biopic. And it just made me appreciate it more and more. I know a lot of people discredit the 76 remake, but for me, if you learn about its history, it makes the film more fascinating. I find there's so much rich history with that rivals the original in terms of how it got made.
wow, that is very interesting, Jack. I mean, so the 76 wasn't your first Kong, but it was King Kong Lives.
It was technically the original and then Lives. We literally jumped to like pretending, oh, this is the sequel to the original. So
yeah, wish I had the Blu-ray of it here.
So in a way, when I watched King Kong Lives, I spoiled the ending for myself to the remake. I was like,
no. Yeah, and I was the one who introduced you to the new Blu-ray release at G-Fest this year.
I already knew of its existence, but the fact that you told me a booth was selling it, I'm like, I have to buy it because it is so hard to find online for a good price. And thankfully, the guy running the booth had really good deals. So I waited till Sunday to buy everything because it was just everything was on discount. So I was like, all right, cool.
Yeah,
I spent over like $300 at G-Fest. I'm like, what is wrong with me?
well, luckily I bumped into you that time, and then I did tell you they're selling King Kong Lives on Blu-ray, and they're almost a limited times of selling them. And
Yeah. Does it play on all region coding Blu-ray players?
Oh yeah, I did test it. I mean, it does work on my Ultra HD player, which is 4K.
Okay, yeah, because I can play it. Can I play it on a regular? Is it just 4K or is it like Blu-ray?
I well, it is the I got my well, to me, I only have the Ultra HD 4K player, which you play 4K disc, and I did put the disc in, and it works perfectly fine.
All right, I'm gonna have to because I haven't tested mine yet. I just recently filmed my vlog from G Fest, so I finally put it on the shelf. So I have to like take a glance at it when I get a chance to watch it. So I have to see how the quality is. But yeah, we're here to talk about the first one.
Oh yeah, I don't want to. King Kong Liz, I'll be talking about that in my next episode, and so so thank you for sharing of how you discovered this film, Jack. So I'll be sharing how I discovered this film, which I think I explained it in my King Kong's the original 33 episode that I did back in March, I think. I mean, was it April? I don't. It's hard to remember, but yeah, I think so. Actually, Jack, this film was actually my very first Kong film I ever watched as a
Good
kid.
One to start with.
What?
Good one to start with.
Oh yeah, this was my very first Kong film I ever watched before I discovered the 33 film, and this was way before I became a Godzilla fan or Kong fan. And yeah, but before I discovered that film, I did discover Kong, the character Kong, that I first discovered him on of Confrontation.
Oh, you went on the ride too.
Yep.
Wow. Okay, we're both veterans of his attack. We're both survivors.
Well, actually, I didn't roll the ride. I discovered Kong on the Orlando, Florida to family VS chess thing. That it's like a family like this a documentary about the theme park and
one of the tour guide videos.
Yeah, it's one of those tour guide videos, and they discover all the rides. And
I think I know which one you're talking about. I actually might have that exact tape. Hold up. Is it this one?
Actually, that's not the right one, but it is the other tape that is. I think it's from the early 2000s. That's
okay. When Islands of Adventure, because this is pre Islands of Adventure, and what I love is it's to get this. It's by John. It has John Forsythe on it. He's really
Cool. Well, I'm talking about the one that Islands of Adventure just opened. That tape. Yeah, that tape where the lady took a group of family around. Yeah. I missed that tape so much. And good thing I discovered that full video on YouTube. I gotta watch that someday. And
that's the stuff on YouTube is great. Like it's such a good resource if you're talking about the rides. Like it's great people have just uploaded that stuff.
Yeah, so I discovered the character Kong of Confrontation. I remember when after I watched the whole tape a few times, I went to Universal and with my family, and when I discovered the Confrontation ride, I mean, it was when I was a little kid. I mean, to be honest, I was kind of afraid to go on every ride. I don't want to go on it. I mean,
that was me too. Like I had that scare as well, but I was like, I mean, at the end of it, I still went on them. I think for me, because I saw the tail end of the rides run because it was like 98. I think the first time I went on it. So is when they went through that purple lighting phase where like in the mid 90s to hide the limited movements of Kong, they would dim the lights a little bit more on the set to be more purple than they were like red or a more like orange fire, like a lot of like the original setup was. I think they were cutting costs by that point.
Yeah. So, and yeah, I remember when I was in line from outside to the inside of the building. I mean, yeah, I remember like I never rode on that ride. I mean, I was in line. I mean, I was so afraid. I almost cried. I mean,
I'll consider you a survivor regardless. Even if you didn't go on the ride, you still experienced like the queue and the gift shop. Like the gift
Yeah.
shop's amazing.
Yeah, and lucky for me, my dad just took me out of the ride. We were about to enter through it, and then we just went through, and it just went. Me and my dad just went through the gift shop. I think as far as I remember. I remember seeing that big Kong statue, like,
That
and
thing was beautiful. Like the fact they can't even like I've been trying to find that thing for almost a decade. I can't seem to get any clues on it. Like apparently, I would imagine it's somewhere in one of the storage units, but they're very disclosed about where it is because obviously they don't want people going to find the stuff.
yeah, and then I remember when I was walking through the stairways to the gift shop, and then I could almost hear Kong roaring in the background, and
Well, I mean, his roar echoed throughout the attraction, but then on the photo op, they had it where when you got in his hand to take a picture, they would intentionally press the roar button so you could get a genuine frightened reaction from him when you took the picture. So your most faces on him is legitimately like, oh my god, like this thing's horrifying.
yeah, and then yeah, that's how I discovered the character, and then I think like a year later, I mean, that I learned that my mom was slipping through the channels, and my mom just bring me to the TV saying that King Kong was on. I mean, she told me that was like the same one from the ride. It is the '76 films.
Ah, very good.
Yeah, I think she had what I think she had it on where Kong was encounter drawn when she picks her up,
Yeah. Oh, great scene. Good scene. Well shot.
and I'll never forget that train scene when Kong was like attacking the train. I had this feeling if that was like from the ride.
That's what the ride was based on. Was that scene? It was a lot of that and a lot of the what is it, the stuff with him on the when he goes over the East River and you see that one shot of him going past the Queensville Bridge. That's where the idea of like, okay, let's just put him on the bridge because that'll and then we can tell a little story in between that time frame. So in between the time he goes over to the bridge, he's walking towards the bridge in that shot where he's walking back to Dwan telling Jack, "Let's go get a drink at the Brown Derby." In between that area is where that whole ride is supposed to take place.
Yeah, and you did cover that on one of your confrontation video. That yeah, and
Yeah, they had
yeah,
like footage from the ride that they or from the movie that they spliced in to give people an idea. Oh, this is what happened.
yeah, and like I say, this ride was definitely based on the '76 film. I mean, even my parents thought that this ride was based off the original '33 film, but they were wrong.
It's really all based on the ride, based on art direction outside of the attraction. So like the banners, the gift shop are a lot more 1933 than the ride itself.
Yeah, and let me tell you a very strange story. I mean, how I discovered the film on VHS after my mom maybe discovered the film on cable. It was on television. I mean, I was I was hoping to find this film on VHS at my local video store, and this same video store that I discovered my first Toho Godzilla film, Godzilla 1985, the one with Raymond Burr, and yeah, I was hoping to find the King Kong VHS. I mean, and and I did found the VHS cover, but it is not the '76 original VHS cover. It is the '33 VHS,
Mm.
but it shows a picture of Kong on top of the Empire State Building with the attacking the helicopters, and on the back of it you see an image of Kong finding the pterodactyl, and then
So was it the original in the tape, or was it the remake in the tape? They just switched them out.
I think they just switched them out. I mean, I
Ooh,
I think the '76 film was the only tape they have on my old local video store. I mean, but the cover has the '33 cover of it.
that's like the advertising for that King Kong versus Godzilla variant with like the '76 Kong. You think you oh wow, they actually did make the Heisei one. No, it's just the original again. Like
Yeah, I was like, and then when I brought it home, it is the '76, and it is so yeah, and and this was like before I discovered the 33, and then not until like another year later. I think 2 years later, after I discovered Godzilla, and I was became a Godzilla fan, and then later when I discovered the King Kong 33 film, and I rent it on VHS at this local library that's like further like a mile away. I mean, but I did watch the original, and I thought it is so different. It's all in black and white, and I especially that scene when Kong find the T-Rex. I mean, I thought that scene was familiar, but yeah, I was like, hey, that was the clip that they use in the making of Jurassic Park.
Yeah, I know. I love if you go watch that documentary again.
Yeah, the one
Apparently
that
they didn't have the original soundtrack. They had the audio. They had to mix the different sounds in it. If you go look at it, you're like, what? This isn't the sound. This isn't Max Steiner.
yeah, I'm talking like you know what I'm talking about. The one
Yeah,
that James.
The one with the late James Earl Jones when he narrated it, which is like a great documentary, by the way.
Yeah, rest in peace, James Earl Jones.
Mm.
It was so sad that he died not too long ago.
I mean, a lot of it. I mean, like it's good to mourn. The guy was like what 93. He lived a good life though. Like he lived a decent life.
Yeah, we'll always remember him as Mufasa and Darth Vader. But back to my history of this. I mean, yeah, so yeah, that scene I was shocked that was from the making of Jurassic Park clip, and then later when Kong was fighting the pterodactyl scene, I thought, hey, that was like the image from the VHS cover of the '76 tape.
I find it interesting that most tapes for '76 didn't really have any images on it, other than the poster and on the back, the shot of Lang in the hands. That's all we had to work with the original releases.
Yeah, they did release some. They used that like first there are different VHS covers of this film. I mean, the back on the back side, it's just like the original tape shows Dwan and Kong's hand, and then when Paramount released the earliest DVD version of it, it's just on the back. I mean, the earliest DVD it just shows Kong on top of the World Trade Center. I mean, on the back it just shows Dwan and Kong's hand. And it was like
it's the exact same as the VHS. Now, what's interesting, I can bring this up. The first DVD edition, they basically ripped it from the Laserdisc, from what I heard. They just ripped the Laserdisc copy, which is what most early DVDs were. And this was released, I think, in 98, 99. But then after 9/11, they actually pulled it off shelves, and so it's become one of the more rarer versions of the film to find. You can find it in some areas for still pretty cheap. Like I found mine for like $1 at like a trade off. But it is actually for a lot of people like one of the rare copies of the film to find.
Yeah, and I gotta say, I mean, they did release a special edition DVD by Paramount. There was a release like
yeah, 2005.
Yeah, that the Peter Jackson film was released. I mean,
it was the same as the original DVD. The only thing they changed was they just changed the color to be less offensive, the cover, but it was still the same quality. Like, it's funny to think we didn't get a proper, really good, high-quality version of the film until now. Like, until the last few years, we've had to stick with that DVD version for the longest time because it's very hard to get, like, a proper quality version of the film. So, thank God for Shout Factory, is all I'll say.
Yeah.
I mean, I haven't watched the 4K version yet, but I think I'm still going to stick with that release. That is probably the most definitive release I could ask for. It was perfect.
And I get why they and it's this when Shout Factory released this on Blu-ray, it's like this is like the first time that King Kong 76 has ever released since 2005 of the DVD home video release. And
yeah, there were still like variants out there, but in terms of Blu-rays, the only way you could get them when they started was through like different regions outside of the US, which means you had to get a region code Blu-ray and you had to get it shipped. And like the one everybody wanted was the Japanese one because that actually had some of the deleted scenes from the extended cut that were on the Bluray, and so a lot of people were trying to track that down.
Yeah,
Shout Factory pulled through. I was very shocked they were actually able to get a proper copy of it.
Yeah, and I did watch the TV extended cut version of it from last night and this morning because I watched the part 1 last night and I watched part 2 this morning.
Do you prefer the extended cut or the original theatrical?
I think I prefer to the original theatrical. I did like the extended cut too. But I mean, it's just I can't believe they just do a. I just don't like the 2 parts. I mean, it's almost like it's kind of almost like a Batman show. It's like a chapter's like tune in next week.
I mean, that was NBC. They did that a lot. I know. It was interesting because like I do prefer the theatrical cut of the film. I think it's perfectly fine. With the extended cut, it's more just if you want more stuff, if you want to like watch it as sort of like a soap opera or something to just put on the background. But for me, the only thing is like it's very difficult because as much as I like what's put back in, I still do prefer the theatrical cut. If you want a middle ground, I would like the theatrical cut with some of the stuff from the extended version put back in. I think the one scene that should have never been cut, there's 2 scenes that should have been cut. The scene where Kong takes the car and tosses it, I think, why lose such great Kong destruction footage? Because I feel like in the theatrical cut, it is a little too short. And then there's one additional bit of dialogue in the scene in the Hangover Square bar restaurant where it's that line that kind of like, because was it Dwan and Jack when Dwan's like, does that offer still stand? And then Jack says, that depends on Kong. Because if that monkey doesn't make it out alive, he's going to be on our backs for the rest of our lives, meaning we can't be together if he ends up dying. And it sort of symbolizes what would happen at the end. And because if you look at the original theatrical cut, it's so abrupt and why would Jack Prescott not try to go for her at the end? In fact, they shot a scene originally. The original ending was you were going to see him walk away. He was going to walk off.
Yeah, that's what I heard of. I mean, yeah, and it
was in preview screenings. That and the original demise of Prescott was also extended. But because the audience actually said, first of all, the villain doesn't die. That's a pisser. So the feedback was kill the villain. And then people said the ending was too depressing. The only joke I can make is like from Family Guy where that guy's going to win the case and then he gets shot and rolls down the stairs. It's like, oh, right, it's a 70s movie. Because all 70s movies have to end depressingly.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah. Even when I was a kid, when I saw this, I cried. I mean, I did cry when Kong gets shot down and then he falls off the World Trade Center and I hear his heartbeat. I mean, and his heartbeat is slowing down and it's just like it's just a heartbreaking moment. I mean,
it is probably the most heart-wrenching out of the 3. Like, I still think the original is still pretty powerful as sort of like what makes it great is that he's a monster like the whole movie, but then when he starts getting killed and he starts dying, then only at the very end do you feel sorry for this creature. Like, that's what makes I think the original so powerful. But this one, you've gotten to know Kong, you've gotten to see what he is, and you see a very good middle ground. Whereas the Peter Jackson one's like, this guy's just an animal. This guy's just like a scared animal the whole time. And so I feel like in a way, like I love the Jackson remake, but I feel like being too realistic when adding more of the animal tributes to his character, it takes away the monster, that like the iconic movie monster that he is. So, I mean, I guess we're finding sort of a bridge now where like we prefer realism, but now we're kind of stepping back and saying, I kind of miss the monster mash. I kind of miss him just being a big monster. So I feel like 76, that's why I like it so much. It's a good balance between he's an animal, but he's also a monster. So it blends the two perfectly.
Yeah, but I did love when Kong's fighting the helicopters. I mean, when the helicopters fire at Kong, he's like spray blood everywhere. That's like my favorite scene when I watched it as a kid. I mean, it didn't gross me out. I just kept watching it because it's like a good scene to watch. But when Kong's dying, it makes me felt sorry for the ape. And
well, I mean, even in the I think in like because I mean, I guess we could go quickly to where they started this production. It was originally like an idea conceived by, of all people, Michael Eisner. who was like who was not the head of Disney yet. He was working, I think, at ABC, and he had watched the original on television, and he was like, he probably got, because like even back then there were remakes. Like Hammer was doing remakes of all these monster movies from like the 50s to the 60s, the Universal monster movies, and they were the first to approach RKO about a remake. But RKO had a no remakes policy, so they couldn't make it. So instead, they remade 1 Million Years BC with Raquel Welch. Now, when Eisner saw the original, he said, let's get a remake going. This was like the 70s, so this is like a little bit more, Cooper, I think, had just passed away, the creator, and so I guess the license were kind of like wherever. And go ahead.
And yeah, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up. I mean, and I did hear something that I think you already covered this in your review video. I mean, that there was like a battle of Paramount and Universal trying to get the rights to do
being made at the same time, and it all stems from a whoopsie that RKO had, where RKO had signed a actual like written contract in permanent ink to Paramount, but at the same time they were meeting with Universal, they had a verbal contract. So that's where the conflict happened, because that was RKO making a big whoopsie and agreeing with both. So both studios immediately went to production, not realizing what they had gotten themselves into, and that's what led to the lawsuit. And it was mostly De Laurentiis who led the charge in suing Universal, because he felt he was in the right, which he was. He had the actual like written contracts where he was in the right. So of course he went after them. But I also do think Universal, they also had a chance to do it. And the fact that they got that far, even with all the court battles, is astonishing. Like, there are scripts out there written by the late Bold Goldman, who did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. He wrote a couple of treatments, and I've read a couple of them, and they're like, the fact they got as far as they did with that production before getting the plug pulled because of the courts is astonishing. So like, yeah, eventually Paramount won the battle, and and here's the crazy part. They had to get this movie made in less than a year. They had from January to December to film. They thankfully had a year of pre-production, so they had a year to write the script, to storyboard, to pre-plan and everything. But they literally had to start shooting, I think, on January 17th, 1976, and had to release the film on December 17th, 1976. So they had less than a year to film and post-production this whole thing.
This sort of sounds similar to what they're making Son of Kong. Sounds similar.
But unlike Son of Kong, which only had 9 months, and you know what? Actually, I wanted to say, you know what's another movie, another sequel that only had 9 months to get its movie done? Was Jaws 4.
Wow.
Jaws 4 also had a 9-month production period where they had to get this thing done under the demand of Sid Sheinberg. Sorry, there is a fly in me here. Jeff Goldblum, go away. Yeah, they had essentially they had like less than a year, actually. If you count like 1 month gone, they had like 11 months to produce this, and it worked. Like, it did pay off, because the reason why is because they put out the teaser poster a year in advance, and it was a rough version with, instead of the helicopters, it was the planes with Kong on both the towers. And it was in a newspaper ad that said 1 year from today, the movie will be released, even though they haven't shot anything yet. They pulled it. Essentially, they almost had an Alien 3 on their hands, where, if you know the story behind Alien 3, how they released the teaser before they even shot anything.
Wow.
That's like, you don't do that. Make sure, at least when you put out a teaser, I mean, I've learned this now. Put out a teaser when you've pretty much got the movie wrapped. When like at least like 75% completed.
I mean, while they're making the film, you did bring up the teaser poster for Kong. I mean, when they were making it, they were planning to have Kong climb up on the Empire State Building like in the original, but when the teaser poster was released, I think De Laurentiis saw this. I mean,
it was De Laurentiis who had pushed for the World Trade Center, because at the time, much like the original King Kong, Cooper had originally wanted the Kong in the original to climb the Chrysler Building, or what was the building that Susan Sarandon as the dragon climbed up in Enchanted? What building was that? I can't remember in Enchanted.
Oh yeah, the Disney film. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah,
don't.
where she's the dragon, she climbs up. Now, what's funny is that actually that whole sequence is almost right out of the original Edgar Wallace draft, where he's on the tower and gets struck by lightning. That was the original ending to Kong. It wasn't airplanes; he was actually going to be struck by lightning.
Wow.
So I love that Enchanted kind of play homage to that with one of the buildings that Cooper had originally planned. Now, at the time, the Empire State Building, like I think like a month into principal photography on Kong had just been built, had just opened, and Cooper was like, "That's the one. That's the building." Right. So come 76, history kind of repeated itself because everybody was expecting the Empire State Building, but the deal of De Laurentiis, because again, I think De Laurentiis was already having a lot of people were thinking of an idea of a remake around the 70s. So 1973, the World Trade Centers just get built. They're just open to the public.
Yeah, because
And you could tell De Laurentiis was like, no, we're going to go for a bigger tower this time. Bigger monkey, bigger tower.
yeah, because World Trade Centers were built, I think, 1973. I think.
They were open. They were being built around the late 60s to the early 70s, but they opened in 73.
Oh, it's because, those buildings were made in the same year that Godzilla versus Megalon was made by Toho. But when they released it in America in English dub, they did release the poster of Godzilla and
Godzilla
Megalon.
Megalon the Towers, which is hilarious to me. You could tell they were cashing in on 76 Kong. So so it was the same thing. History repeated itself. Now, I know it made sense. I don't know if he ever came up with that assumption. I imagine he did, where he's like, big a monkey, big a tower, because if you look at the movie, because in the original King Kong, he's supposed to be 18 to 25 feet tall. The 76 remake, he's actually established to be about 40 feet tall. So he's twice the size of the original. So therefore, I guess that's the idea. Bigger ape, bigger monkey, bigger tower. So that was sort of the idea I think De Laurentiis had. Now, at the time, there was protest. There were fans of the original who actually protested at the Empire State Building. And they like, you know the saying everybody has, like, don't ruin my childhood? That was a thing even back then. And they had headlines on the newspapers that said, don't rape the ape. Like, it was like that level of like, do not ruin our childhoods.
Yeah, I can't.
The fact it existed even back then, people were getting mad at things.
Yeah, and even some of my childhood memories were ruined by when Universal theme parks were, especially Orlando, they took down some of my favorite rides from my childhood, like Jaws and
Back to the Future, or Earthquake. Even like Earthquake was gone. Kong closed in September 8th, 2002. And
yeah,
the people actually get confused between the Hollywood and Florida one, which one burnt down. People think both did. No. Confrontation closed first. Then the Kong Encounter in Hollywood burnt down. Now, the reason it closed down, the one in Florida, was just due to budget cuts, because it was just getting very expensive to run. And it was, and there were multiple factors. And also, it was like, it was costing too much to repair and maintain. A lot of people assumed it was 9/11 that caused them to close it down because there was too much destruction, which I'm going to clear that up, because that didn't matter in the slightest.
yeah, that's what I thought too.
The main reason is because Universal just had a brand new franchise on their hand with the Mummy movies with Brendan Fraser. They were making bank, and they thought, well, we got to capitalize on this. We got a Scorpion King movie. We need a ride, because
I love the Mummy.
Selling. So they said, all right, well, which ride is costing us the most? Kong. Close it down. We'll build us a roller coaster, because that'll save us a lot of money.
Yeah, I never got the chance to ride that ride.
Revenge of the Mummy?
Oh no, I did rode the Mummy ride, but I usually rode that ride mostly at Orlando, but I did rode the Hollywood ride for one time back in 8 years ago. And
which one? The Revenge of the Mummy in Hollywood?
Yeah, the Hollywood was my first time, but I rode the Orlando one so many times. Every time I did spot an Easter egg of the
the gold statue. I wanted to bring this up because I bring this up at my G-Fest vlog. But I bought this at G-Fest. I bought the reproduction of the Aurora model kit. I'm going to be building this and actually spray painting it gold to make it look like the statue on the ride.
Wow.
Because I want to find a better, clearer look at it, because whoever sculpted that, I would love to say, can you make me one? Because I love that like, I love that the sculpture specifically looks like the one from the ride. That's what now what's interesting, I think they also at one point, not only is there the statue, I think somewhere in that treasure room there's like a big banana that's like a gold banana on one
Oh
of
yeah. Yeah, I never caught that. I mean,
in the one
but
in Hollywood, in the treasure room, there's supposed to be a gold statue of E.T. because that was the ride that predated in that stage. That's where the E.T. adventure used to be, was where the Mummy is in Hollywood.
yeah, and when we went to the when the car went to the big room where we were going really fast, and then it was a thrill ride, and I did spot the roof of the crane where they
The track, yeah.
the track. Yeah.
Now, what's cool is actually if you go and do a VIP tour, you can actually they can actually take you backstage, and they can, like, if you ask them about Kong and what's left there. Like, I went and did excruciating research there. I asked them as many times as I could to do as much detailed work, because I was telling them, anything, if you can go deep if possible, and they let me. And they would actually, like, on the ride, they would shine a flashlight for me to view, and they would show me the track. Even though the ride was running, they would have a flashlight to just say, you see that? There's where the track is. I'm like, oh, wow. Now, again, the reason why the track's there is because it's built in the foundation of the stage, where if they take that out, the roof's gone. The roof is gone if they take that out. So they would rather
the roof
not.
will collapse.
Yeah, they would rather not. So they just kept it there. They just said, screw it, keep it there.
And I'm looking forward to go to their new theme park that they're building soon.
Yeah, Epic Universe. I mean, I'm excited. I'm more excited for the monster stuff and Nintendo. Everything else, like,
Me too.
Okay, I'll admit, I'm not a big diehard Harry Potter fan. I will admit the rides and the stuff at the park are cool. But I will say the Ministry of Magic actually doesn't look that bad. But anyway, we're getting way off topic.
Yeah, I mean,
I tend to do that a lot.
that's okay, Jack. I mean, I know, but back to the film. I mean, I want to talk about Kong climbing on top of the World Trade Center. I mean, first of all, I didn't even know that those buildings even exist. I mean, until I discovered why these buildings don't exist, because due to the 9/11, I first discovered 9/11 because nobody never mentioned me that of what happened. And
well, I think again, it was so bad. Like, I think a lot of people just kind of kept quiet about it for a long time. It's only I think in the last maybe 15 years has it kind of been, okay, we can talk about it again. But there was a period of time just everybody kept their lips shut, because I was like, it was that bad.
Yeah.
So when it came to when they did that, like, they filmed that in many ways. They filmed it, I think, in a total of like 3 or 4 nights at the plaza. They had brought in, now at the time they were planning to use the animatronic Kong, but Carlo Rambaldi did not have it finished. Believe it or not, that animatronic was not used until the very end of production. It was like the last thing, even though Del Rente says this is what's going to make the effects, and that was a lie. They had to rely on Rick Baker for the whole thing. But this animatronic, so as a backup, Del Rente said, can we build like a dummy version, at least for the ending? And that's what they did. And they built this thing out of styrofoam. This whole this whole sculpture of Kong out of styrofoam. And then they took some fiberglass and put that over it. And they put fur and everything. And then they shipped it in like 6 trucks over from like California to New York.
Wow.
Make that movie, the road trip with Kong with the 6 trucks, like the dangers they had to go through. So it was a cross country over from LA to New York on these trucks. And then they set it up in the plaza. They had fake foam concrete that, like, the cracks where his impact was. They had so much blood to use. And the first night they had everybody there. In fact, one person who was there, he wasn't there I don't think he ever made a cameo or anything, but he was actually hanging out with the cast and crew and entertaining the crowds while they waited, was a guy named Philippe Petit, who was the man who did the walk wire across the Twin Towers. Like, he was the daredevil that took the wire that that movie, that movie that Robert Zemeckis made. So Philippe Petit, that guy. So he was hanging out with Jeff Bridges most of the time. Now, this was after he did that Daredevil stunt, and I think he went to he didn't go to jail for it. I think he had to serve community service, so he had to serve as an entertainment guy venue at the World Trade Center, and people would constantly ask him about that. So him and Jeff would hang out. So the first night was okay. They didn't have all the cast there. They were mostly getting crowd shots. The cameraman, I think Glenn Robertson, he had to go to the very top of the World Trade Center, and he had to stand on a plank that actually went out. Like, he had to wear a harness and everything, but he was on this little wooden plank, right? And he had to almost tightrope on it. And he had to get the camera to look down at the crowds cheering out for Kong. So those shots of the crowds you see in those big wide shots of the crowds coming in, that was Glenn Robinson holding on to dear life onto this board that went out of the tower range.
Wow.
It didn't even go past the balcony. No, it went past the balcony because you couldn't get the camera in the right area in the balcony. So they just put a big plank out, and he would go out there and just do it, hoping that thing would hold his weight. And they just got the shots, and so the first night was just getting all that. The second night is where things got crazy, because that's when the cast came in, and they invited the public to come in as extras. And they actually overcrowded the World Trade Center Plaza. The first take they're supposed to come in, they trampled over security. They trampled over Lang, and they were grabbing spotches of Kong's hair. One of the eyeballs, glass eyes, got stolen, and so the whole thing was shut down, because then the Port Authority came in and said, "You got to shut this down because we're concerned there's too much weight on the plaza that could collapse. So you got to disperse everybody out." The next morning, the newspaper said Kong got mugged.
Wow. I did not notice that. I got to do more research about this stuff.
The third night, they were able to do more crowd control, where there was more paid extras only, and they were able to shoot as much as they could on the third and fourth night, and they got through it. But the first two nights were pretty hectic. So that was like the main shooting. But then when it came to all the miniatures and everything, that was all done at MGM in LA with Rick Baker on these models of the towers. Now, they were originally going to use RC choppers, but then they decided, let's do a safety thing, and they put them on a track with wires. So they just had them on a little track that went around the stage, and then a lot of it was blue screen. And then the most fascinating is Rick Baker had to wear the suit at an airfield at night. They set up an airfield, a platform he could stand on. You know those shots of the helicopters, where he's kind of facing from the back and the helicopters are coming in? So those were done with Rick Baker on a platform in this airfield, and they flew legitimate H-1 helicopters towards Rick Baker, and they fired blank rounds at him. So they didn't fire actual rounds at him, but they fired blanks. And the only thing Rick Baker had to be careful of is the hot shells getting on the suit that when the helicopters flew by. So that's how they did a lot of that stuff. There's so much BTS on there. In fact, I just discovered an archive. I can't remember where. There's raw footage, raw takes of not just the crowds at the presentation, but them taking the helicopter models and blowing it up on the side of the building. I found remember that old footage of the Jaws animatronic that was discovered that was the raw footage? There's that for Kong. And I was like, I didn't know this existed. I need this footage.
That's very interesting.
The second extended cut.
And one thing I noticed when Kong is on the World Trade Center, when a couple of men with blowtorches, when he's blowtorching Kong, when Kong's running away, when he did a far jump, and when the camera was shot below, when he's shot Kong in the air, when he's jumping across to the other tower, and you hear ants drawn screaming, and from that shot, when you see Kong jump through, I was like, he was almost glowing orange. It's almost like, is he on fire?
It was bad. It was basically bad compositing. That was done. Now, what's interesting, that jump was not done by Rick Baker. That was done by a guy they hired who was Rick Baker's stuntman, Will Shepard is his name. They had two people as Kong. They had Rick Baker and the uncredited Will Shepard, who was always Rick's stand-in in case Rick couldn't do the shot. So Will Shepard is responsible for a lot of Kong's stunts. So things like him leaping over the towers, him smashing through the gates, falling into the pit of chloroform. A lot of that was Will Shepard. In fact, the scene where he crashes the wall and he falls down, right? When he falls into the pit, and you see that shot of him kind of getting up and kind of reaching for the heavens, and he kind of smashes his
Yeah.
fist down. So the story goes is that was Will Shepherd in the suit doing the fall. They had to get it done in one take, and so they had multiple cameras set up with him. He did the fall, and then what happened was is that take you see in the film is actually what he considers an outtake, because it's actually him reaching out, thinking like almost like he falls in, gets up, and he's thinking like, I'm okay. He's almost like giving a thumbs up.
Yeah.
It's like, I'm okay. But he almost feels like he messed up the take. So out of frustration, Will Shepherd literally was so mad he felt he messed up the take. He literally got so mad he smashed it into the set. And it turns out, no, that like actually that him getting frustrated, they played it back, and then they said, like, he thought he messed up, but they said, no, you're that actually looks good. So they kept that in the film. Him thinking he messed up and getting frustrated, they kept that because they felt that's Kong getting so frustrated he can't beat the chloroform. So he's like, curse you! Ah! So
yeah, that's like an awesome scene. I mean, I did love the wall doors breakthrough. I mean, he's breaking through the door. It's like that scene I love so much. I mean, it kind of makes me think of that scene from The Shining.
Oh, here's Kongy.
Yeah,
that kind. Think missing his hand to punch it through, and then you see him like his face kind of like coming through the hole in the door.
Yeah, when the camera shot farther away from the door, you see a big hole in there. You almost see Kong's face. It's kind of almost like, here's Kongy.
Well, what's great is the miniature stuff's great because they had the full scale wall on the back lot at MGM, and it cost like $800,000 to build. It was one of the largest sets ever built at the time. And then they had a miniature version. And the miniature version's fantastic. Like when we did our own remake, we did sort of the same thing. We had mostly a miniature, but we built. Our model was maybe about like, I'd say almost like 20, 30 feet across. And it was just bamboo fencing. And then the gate was just like 2 cardboard boxes with the thing. And then that was one of the first things we did was we had Brad in the suit like smash it. And I was getting that vibe. Like this must have been what it was like in 76 to just break this miniature. There's something that's so satisfying about models just going kaboom or just breaking or smashing in slow motion cameras. It's just so satisfying.
Yeah, I mean, and then the wall is awesome especially when they show that first scene when it's like I know the wall looks so realistic. It's almost like they actually build like a mile tall wall.
It was about like I would say a mile. It was about maybe I can't remember how many feet they stated it was. I think it was almost like 500 feet. Like maybe 500 feet in length, and then like height wise, it was probably over 100 feet up. I think about 75 feet up. I can't remember the exact measurements, but enough to where you could feel like this is enough to hold a big gorilla back, essentially. Which is funny because like I love in the Orlando new Kong ride, they built the wall and it's to scale. This thing's 100 feet up. You're like, oh wow, they actually built the dang wall. Okay, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, and I know that this film for the Skull Island scene, I know that I was filmed in Hawaii and
yes, the island of Kauai to be exact, which is also where they filmed Jurassic Park.
Yeah, and Jack, get this: if if Jeff Goldblum was in this one, I mean, even though he's not really in it, I mean,
I thought him and Jack Prescott are Ian Malcolm and him are kind of the same character.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and no wonder that they filmed Jurassic Park in Hawaii. They make Jeff Goldblum say this line, saying, "When they got in there, King Kong."
Well, I've always told myself, it's like, because I've seen this island filmed on so many movies, and to me, I'll just say it, like the island of Kauai for me, if I ever go visit it, I'm going to tell myself, I'm on Skull Island right now. I'm on the real Skull Island. I know it's Jurassic Park, but I don't care. To me, this is Skull Island. If I ever were to visit it, to me, that is the real Skull Island.
Yeah, I've never been to Hawaii before in my whole life.
Entirely, so
Yeah, if I were to go there, I would definitely want to visit the film locations when they filmed Jurassic Park and Kong, especially that beach scene.
Yeah, the thing is with that beach is it's actually a very seclusive beach that only a few people can get into, because the issue is not necessarily it being public or anything like that. It's a matter of the currents. It can get really dangerous on that beach, because there are times, yeah, you see the beach, you see the sand, but other times the sand ain't there at all. It is just the current. The current will literally take the beach away at times and flood that whole area. And it will literally like be, you cannot go there, because if you do, the waves will crash you into the rocks. That's why it's so seclusive and not many people can go there, because it is a safety hazard. Only a few who have access, who know when it's safe, and on top of that have the budget for it. Hence why mostly movies are shot there. The only two films I know were shot there were 76, and actually Pirates of the Caribbean on Stranger Tides was also shot there. They shot a scene for it there as well. So it's a very seclusive beach on the island, and it's very hard to get access to. I actually had talked to, about a year before he passed away, the great Rene Auberjonois, who was Roy Bagley in this film, the oil specialist.
Oh yeah, him.
I had met him at a Comic-Con. He because he's also known for Star Trek. He was in Deep Space Nine, I believe, or Star Trek Voyager. I can't remember.
Wasn't he the voice of the chef in Little Mermaid?
In Little Mermaid, yeah, he's done a lot of stuff. And I talked to him about Kong mostly, and he told me that, you know, if you're a fan of this movie, you have to go to Kauai. Like, you have to go see it, because he told me describing it to you, Jack, it's not going to do justice. You just have to go see it, because it was unlike anything I've done so many films in my career, and that was one of my earliest, but that was one of the most amazing experiences I had. And anybody who goes and films there or goes there in general should take it in and appreciate it. And I told him that. I said, you know, to me, that always will be Skull Island. And if I ever go, like, I'm going to feel like I traveled to the real one. So that is on the bucket list at some point.
Yeah, so let's talk about the characters. I mean, and I know that as Jeff Bridges, Charles Gordon, and the great Jessica Lange.
There was, a ton of actors in this. Jeff Bridges got the role because he just advocated for it. He wanted it. That's what I like about Jeff Bridges. He always advocates for the roles he wants. With Kong, it's because when he was a kid, he used to pretend to be sick to watch it on television. Yeah. And then when he heard about the remake, he's like, I'll definitely do this. And everybody was like, really? A Bridges wants to do this? Okay, well, there's our star quality right there.
Yeah, because he's the dude.
He's the dude. And the same thing actually occurred on The Last Unicorn, because he was the voice of Prince Lear in that. And he was a fan of the book. And he actually advocated to the studio making it, I have to get on this movie, even if I'm not paid for it. I have to be in this movie. Like, I think he originally wanted to play Cedric the Magician, but he got the role of Lear instead. Now, what's funny is with Charles Grodin, when he was auditioning for this movie, he was going for Jack Prescott. He was auditioning for that. But because I think he had played a villain prior in another film, they said, well, why don't you play this character? And that's why we end up getting the great performance of him as Fred Wilson. But I always like when Charles Grodin, whenever he plays a bad guy, he's great. If you ever was it Great Muppet Caper, he's so good in that. He is so hilarious in that as the villain. It's phenomenal. Go ahead.
I like Charles Gordon's character. I mean, as Fred Wilson. I mean, and I just realized when Shout Factory announced the release of this film on Blu-ray. I mean, I think it was that film was released on Blu-ray in stores, I think almost at the same time that Charles Gordon passed away.
Well, what happened was it was already available. What happened was, here's what the piss part for me is that I got the Blu-ray, and then a day later he passed away. That's sort of like the entail I had, because I was immediately watched, and then I got the news. I'm like, all right, well, I'm going to have to pay tribute to him. But, yep, I mean, again, these guys, the thing is, the movie, you got to remember, too, the movie, as of December next year, will be about 50 years old when it started shooting. Like, it's like we're looking at a 50-year-old film that is supposed to be a more modern take, and it still holds up. Like, that's the crazy part. Whereas, like, the original, the 1930s have since come and gone. They almost feel like a fever dream, whereas the 70s still feel fresh. I think that's what makes this remake so good, is that it still feels fresh despite being made like 50 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like a bad Kong film. I mean, it is the first Kong remake film before the Peter Jackson and all that. I mean,
I mean,
and
there were several attempts, but never got off the ground until this movie. In fact, if anything, this movie is responsible for a ton of the first sort of remake rip-offs of the film, because you had like, oh, I've lost count. Every time I feel like I'm done the 70s rip-off craze, another one takes in, because I reviewed, what is it, Queen Kong, Ape, Mighty Peking Man. Those were like the main three, and then I find out there's like two more. And I'm like, there was like Journey to the Center of the Earth that had that like that was made at the same time. There were like Yeti, Giant of the 20th Century. That's like 5 ripoffs. I was like, I thought there were only 3. You were supposed to keep it at 3. The ripoff trilogy.
yeah, I mean, I know that this is the first film they have made a Kong suit besides the big animatronic. I mean, I want to talk about the suit. I mean, well, before we talk about the suit, let's get back to the characters. I mean, I know that Jeff Bridges does an amazing job as Jack Prescott. I mean, it's not like the Jack Driscoll from the original. I mean, Jack Driscoll in the original, he's just an actor for in the film. I mean, for Carl Denham's film company. I mean, but in this one, Jack is this character, Jack Prescott. He's just a documentary. Yeah,
it's like Jaws. He's basically the Richard Dreyfuss character in Jaws. He's the
yeah, sort of like
biologist, the one who does all the scientific stuff. Although it's funny, because I realized something with the 3 Jacks that we know in those films. The first 2 are not really that interesting, whereas the Jackson remake finds like a good balance of somebody we can like, who's likable. It's more about the likability. The original, Bruce Cabot, you look at it now, it's pretty sexist. It's pretty like, he's kind of a real bit of a douche the whole time. Like, I mean, I think also that, he was drinking half the time on set. Whereas Jack Prescott is the polar opposite. Jack Prescott's much more whiny. He's a bit more whiny about things. Whereas in the remake, with Jackson's remake, it's a perfect balance of a guy who's just so nonchalant. He just goes into the jungle because he likes this girl and he wants to make sure she's safe. That's a good balance of likability with Adrian Brody. But with Jeff Bridges, yeah, he is very much the Hooper, Matt Hooper from Jaws, where he's the biologist trying to say, don't kill this animal, we have to study it.
Yeah, and I love this plot change from the original. I mean, it's instead of film company, it is an oil company. It's trying to search for oil, and I love the way how they found Dwan in the middle of the ocean on a raft. I mean, let me be honest, Jack. I mean, Jessica Lange's character is totally my Kong lady crush.
Oh, she's great. She's probably my favorite as well. I mean, it's hard to really pick and choose. I know a lot of people love Fay Wray as the icon. Naomi Watts is a more modern take, but and for me, yeah, I agree. Jessica Lange, out of all of Kong's girlfriends, is probably the pinnacle of it, because it's not only attractiveness, but it's also a matter of character wise, she's a fish out of water per se. Literally, they pick her out of the water. And she's kind of stuck on this adventure, trying to make the most of it, but then more things keep escalating for her, and she tries to get a grasp on it. There's a great character there, because eventually when they get back to New York, she's debating do I want to be a star? Do I want this to be my life? Do I want to get away from it before it gets out of control?
Yeah,
there's good conflict there, and regardless, the consequences is she's a star regardless. She's the lady that survived the beast, that's going to be on her resume for the rest of her life.
Right. And I love her personality in this film. I mean, I know in some trailers they say they're starring Jeff Bridges, starring Jeff Bridges and Charles Gordon and introducing Jessica Lange. I mean, when they say introducing Jessica Lange, I don't know if this was Jessica's.
This was her first movie. This was her first film.
I knew it.
So the story goes, at the time, she was going a few odd jobs here and there. She was doing some modeling work. She was working at as a mime, actually, I think in like France. And there was a whole worldwide casting scout for the perfect girl for this movie. So she auditioned, and there were so many candidates that either fans wanted or audiences wanted, or there were polls. It was things like Farrah Fawcett, Barbara Streisand was a huge contender. There was Meryl Streep, who did audition, and because there's a really sad story where she went to audition for it in New York, and she had seen De Laurentiis there, and De Laurentiis spoke a lot of Italian because he was Italian, and she can understand Italian. And De Laurentiis just looked at her and didn't utter a thing of English, and just said to his manager, "Che brutta," which means, "Why did you bring me this ugly thing?" He basically called Meryl Streep ugly. And so that was enough where she can understand Italian that she literally immediately, when De Laurentiis said that, she walked right off. She walked right off the set, and pretty much, like, I think there's a picture of her on the subway heading home. And then the post on social media, it was a big giant F off to De Laurentiis for just such mistreatment of that. And I mean, granted, might have saved her career because she ended up having a better career on her own. So there were so many candidates, and Lang did it for shits and giggles, and they were so close to production. They were so close to production. They didn't have one yet, and I believe it was either De Laurentiis or John Gulliman, the director, who, when they saw the audition and they realized it, they stood up and said, "I found my Fay Ray," and so she immediately signed up to a picture deal and did the film. And now what happened was that this was her introduction into cinema. She actually won the Golden Globe for this performance.
Wow.
Right? Like, it was for an outstanding achievement in a new starlet. But the problem was that the critics were not very kind to her performance. So she actually took a year or two off out of the Hollywood spotlight to focus on her acting skills. She went and got like an acting coach and that, and she didn't show up until, I think there was a movie she did with Jack Nicholson in like the late 70s, early 80s. And that was the movie where she finally got into the hang of where she's at now.
Yeah, and I discovered I know that I discovered Jessica Lange in King Kong in the 76, but I did discover for the second time in another film of Big Fish. That one is directed by Tim Burton.
You know, I didn't see that one. I didn't know she was in that.
You never seen Big Fish?
There's some Tim Burton movies I have yet to see, so I'm just gonna put that on the record. Like, I just watched Beetlejuice for the first time before the new movie.
Beetlejuice.
I love both of them. So, for me, the other movie I was introduced to Jessica Lange was a movie called Rob Roy. It was her, Liam Neeson, Tim Roth, and John Hurt. It's a movie set in Scotland. It's very much like Braveheart. That movie, she is phenomenal in. You want a good performance from Lange? That is one of the best ones, and it's the one that everybody forgets about because it came out at the same time as Braveheart. But it's a better movie.
Yeah, I never seen that one, but
that's a good one.
But yeah, you should watch Big Fish someday. It's a really good film.
I should. Like, there's still a couple Tim Burton movies I have to check out. Like, what was it? I didn't see Dark Shadows. I refused to see Dumbo because that sucked. Anyway, with Lange, yeah, she's I'm glad she took those 2 years off. Like, her first, like, talk about a really good first gig to make a first impression and then take a couple of years off and come back and actually you end up being better than what you were before. Like, that is actually, career-wise, that's a smart move.
Yeah, it was. I mean, yeah, and I love the one when after she was saved and then she explains her story about why she was on that raft, that she was on some kind of filmmaking company that was. They were
going to Singapore. Oh, she was going to straight up. She was going to end up doing porn. That was the whole gimmick. When she says, "Do you ever meet anybody before whose life was saved by Deep Throat?" Because Deep Throat is actually an infamous porno movie.
Wow.
In the 70s, and they were all watching it in the yacht.
Now I get it.
She didn't want to watch it because she was uncomfortable, and then the yacht exploded. So she was saved from the fact that she didn't have to watch an awful, dirty movie. So, like, she escaped because at the time I think because at the time like that was when that particular industry really started to take off. And so that was that's actually an okay. The thing is too with the script here is people seem to forget. Some people consider the script and the story a little hokey compared to the original. Like the jokes are kind of weird. Well, what do you expect from Lorenzo Semple Jr., the man who wrote the scripts for the 1966 Batman television series?
Oh yeah,
It's the same writer as the Adam West Batman show, and people give Schumacher flack for saying his is very much like the Adam West show. No, he didn't. At least he didn't have the writer.
Yeah, so now I get that you explained to me about the deep throat thing. I mean, even before you explained to me, I was so confused of what she said about deep throat. I mean, I was like, okay, but now I get it.
It's she basically was not going to watch a porno.
Yeah, I mean, So
yeah, and then like that. Yeah, so then the rest of the movie, she like literally changes around. She has like I do like that like because obviously when she was found. She only had her dress, so all the crew like gives her like spare clothes to like sew and stuff and like make her own outfits. Like there's such creativity in this remake too. I think there's a lot of different creative decisions in terms of how you tell the story that are really interesting. I mean, some things don't need explaining. Like you don't need to explain the fog bank because that's just established Skull Island lore. And then on top of that, again, I like how a little bit more realistic this is. A lot of people complain there's no dinosaurs in this.
Yeah, besides the giant snake.
The story goes is that they, De Laurentiis wanted to mainly focus on this being more like a 70s disaster movie. And on top of that, focus on the love story between Kong and Dwan, which is like sort of the first incarnation of the story that really focused on that more. Where the was very vague. And so because of that, they didn't really have time to do much monster action with the rest of the crew. Now, the other reason is because De Laurentiis said, well, with effects nowadays, you can't really do it unless you do the techniques of the original, which he did not want to do. Which I will say is kind of, forgive my language, kind of bullshit. Because a year before Kong 76 came out, there was a little dinosaur movie, that actually the effects still look good for 75 called The Land That Time Forgot with Doug McClure.
Wow.
And you look at the effects in that film, they surprisingly look pretty good for 1975. Now, if you applied that technology to this remake, you technically could have done dinosaurs in this film.
Yeah.
But I think because they wanted to try to stray away as far away from the original film as possible, they said just no dinosaurs, which is, I think, one of the main reasons people were looking forward to a remake, because the dinosaurs were like half the reason people came to see the film. So
yeah, I mean, because they didn't have dinosaurs in this. I mean, if they do, I mean, I've been seeing this on internet, so they show some fan art or fan image editing of Kong 76 fighting the Godzillasaurus. I mean, that would be cool if that would have that kind of dinosaur look style in the film.
Actually, it's interesting when you bring that up, because had they done Godzilla versus King Kong instead of King Ghidorah, imagine that flashback scene, but with Godzillasaurus, and then like you have the original incarnation of Kong show up and they fight. That actually would have been cool. And then that's why almost like years later, when the atomic bomb goes off, their battle continues, but now they're bigger. They're larger creatures.
Yep. And here's my fan art of the Heisei fan art style.
Yeah, I'm starting to think, was Kong going to be sort of in this incarnation a victim of the atomic bombs? Was he going to actually be a part, like he was going to be a mutated gorilla?
Yeah.
That would have been okay. That would have been interesting. But yeah, so yeah, it was more about the human drama, and it was a lot. I mean, Gojira 581 says it best. It was about the human drama, and it was really more about going a bit more realism, because a lot of people say that taking the dinosaurs off the story takes away the magic of Skull Island, the fantasy element. But again, it could still be a very credible story, because you're focusing on Kong as this mythical god, this mythical creature, and his relationship with Dwan is what.
Yeah.
So
And
interesting.
and let me bring this up. I mean, I know in the original that and always screams at Kong the whole movie in the original, but in this one, Dwan doesn't scream at Kong as much because he actually talks back. Because what you brought up, because it has if there was dinosaurs, then Dwan won't have any relationship with Kong. What you said, I mean, it it because I'm glad they didn't have dinosaurs in it because in this film because Dwan just talks back to Kong and not much screaming like Anne in the original, and then when after like when Kong picks her up in that next scene, like she can't stand up heights, and then she tries to explain Kong that he's put her down, and
I like that little nod to the Empire State Building where she says, "When I was 10 years old, they took me up to the Empire State Building and I got sick in the elevator." Like, that was a nice little. I think you notice there is little nods to the original here and there. I
yeah.
also love that they even are like. I like also that the movie is a little self-aware. Like when Jack and the crew show up and they go over to the jungle, and it's like, "Oh, he's taking her." Well, someone's taking her. Well, who the hell do you think went through there? Some guy in an ape suit? I'm like,
Yeah.
you knew what you were doing, and I kind of respect you for knowing what you were doing.
Yeah.
I guess
And,
I even think even Jeff Bridges was probably looking at the effects thinking they're going to have to do a guy in a suit because this robot's not fucking working at all.
yeah. And I just burst laughing so loud when that Dwan just punches Kong in the face or
Right in the
lips.
face. And it's actually the animatronic. That was one of the last things shot, actually, was it was an insert shot. They had shot the scene with Dwan in the hand on blue screen, but by the time they finished using the animatronic on the presentation, they had like another week or so left of production. So they were about to wrap up. And so there was a lot of, I think they had a whole day where Dwan was actually interacting with the full-size Kong in one or two insert shots. One was her punching Kong in the face. They needed that additional shot. So they filmed Dwan on the studio with that. And then the other shot they did, I think, was that shot where when Kong's running away from the flamethrowers. And there's that one shot of Lang I'll just demonstrate it here. She's in the hand, which is the animatronic hand. But they put the full body of the animatronic in the foreground to make it look like they were both part of the same image. So on behind me is the big animatronic hand, and then in front was the robot. So I don't know if the hand on the robot could do the same techniques as the full, because they built like, I think in total, like hand wise, they only built a few. Like they built the one for the robot, but then they had two separate hydraulic hands that had much more better movement for close-ups and everything. And then I think they probably had like a stunt hand or something for a couple of shots.
So, and I'm glad you brought up the big animatronics. So I know in the beginning you show us the tooth, but let's show that tooth again and talk about the animatronic.
So the animatronics, I think, are a little bit more sturdy and interesting than the ape suit stuff. Now, the ape suit stuff was done by Rick Baker, who we all know is one of the class acts of special effects in the industry. The king of, I would say, ape suits in general, because this is one of his first gigs where he built the suit, and it was in collaboration with an Italian effects master at the time who was known for one or two films named Carlo Rambaldi. Now, this guy was done in Italy. He did theme park attractions, and he worked with De Laurentiis on a few projects. And he had built for this movie a life-size Kong robot, which actually was the reason why the film was at the time one of the most expensive movies ever made. That robot, I think, alone, because the budget for the whole thing at the time was $25 million. That was the equivalent today of $250 million. So it was one of the most expensive movies at the time. And out of that $25 million, $8 million went into this freaking robot. $8 million went into this robot because it was like, apparently everybody was telling Carlo, it can't be done. Like, even, you you have a failure of an animatronic when and how long you have, how much prep time you have to build it, that even the people at NASA who just landed on the moon told you are out of your mind. You cannot do this. Right?
Yeah.
And Rambaldi persevered to the best as he could. He didn't make it on time, but he still persevered. Now, the robot was made out of aluminum steel. It had like a couple miles of hydraulic hosing. It had fiberglass. It was also covered in horsehair, but there was a lot of stuff made out of fiberglass and resin. And one of them was this tooth that was made of resin. Now this thing is so it was sculpted and molded and everything, and it was made out of resin. And this was actually one of his fangs. This isn't like a tooth here; it's one of his bottom fangs, I believe.
Wow!
I was able to identify it. So
yeah,
this thing is one of the things that Rambaldi had built. And now the story goes, I'll just bring this up how I obtained this item. This was on eBay in North Carolina because the last known whereabouts of the robot after production went was it was actually recycled. Parts of it were recycled for King Kong Lives because they had built new full-size pieces. They just ripped the best parts off the old robot, tossed it away, and stuck it on as backup for the new one. So this is either, they haven't really confirmed it when I bought it, but this is either one of the ones used on the full-size creature in King Kong Lives, or it was one of the recycled teeth from the 76 remake. So either or, it's still a Carlo Rambaldi piece using the same molds as the original 76 remake.
Yeah, I gotta say that Big Kong animatronic, it was reused again for King Kong Lives. I mean,
parts of it. Let's just say literal parts of it. They literally just took the best pieces, whatever they had left, and just stuck it on them because they had built brand new full-size pieces of Kong for the sequel, and they just had that as sort of like for backup parts, for spare parts, essentially.
Yeah, and I remember that when they in the making of this film, they did show like a silent home video where they're setting up the big animatronic early that morning before filming. I mean,
yeah, there's a lot of behind the scenes kind of slowly coming out there from the production. Now it's odd. It's kind of funny how like the damn robot works in the behind the scenes footage and never on camera, because that was the biggest issue when they shot that scene was unfortunately, the damn thing never worked. It never worked on cue, and so they had to use what they could with the footage. And unfortunately, in total, the animatronic piece had only 10 seconds of screen time.
Yeah, no wonder those scenes were only shot for a few seconds. Like when he's dropping the case,
yeah, like it's literally
when he did
lifting it up, it's like. Now, what's funny is Rick Baker, when he did the miniature versions of that scene, he was directly told to act like the robot so that the shots when you cut were seamless. So when he had to bring those bars down, he couldn't just like smash them down. He wanted to, but they said because of consistency, you have to shoot it like we did the robot. So he was told, that's why in those shots you see him like literally bring it slowly down, because they knew they were going to intercut with the robot.
Yeah, and then yeah, and that's what I noticed when I was watching this film this morning and the other day. I watched both cut versions of this film, and I love that shot when the audience are run away, and then it shows Kong as the big animatronic Kong when he's lifting his arms like
even though it's bum 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 robot. Well, again, you got to remember, too, the biggest reason why De Laurentiis had pushed this, and the main reason he got this remake off the ground, was because of Jaws. Because Jaws, a year prior, was the biggest movie of all time, and De Laurentiis was so cheesed that this kid, who went overscheduled, double the budget, got this success that he said, I'm going to take this away from him. So he made it almost a mission for like 2 years to try to make a movie bigger than Jaws. Kong was an exception. He tried it with Orca, which came pretty close, and then there was the White Buffalo. But then came Star Wars, and then he's like, all right, I got to compete with this guy now and do Flash Gordon. And then by that point, he just gave up trying to compete with all these bigger movies. So a lot of it was basically De Laurentiis trying to say, hey, Spielberg, I can make a bigger robot than yours.
Yeah, and I did hear some... I don't know if this is true. I did hear that when like like when they're making Jurassic Park, when they're trying to come up with animatronic dinosaurs, I think that Spielberg did went to the same guy who did the animatronic of King Kong for the confrontation, right?
It was the one. Okay, so I had actually met him, the guy you're talking about. His name's Bob Gurr. He was actually, believe it or not, he is one of the guys who helped build Disneyland for Walt. He had worked for Walt, and he was a theme park engineer back then. And so he had built in 1986 the King Kong Encounter, which is the first King Kong ride on the Universal Studios tram tour in Hollywood. That was so successful. He actually had no part of the ride built in Florida. He had no part of it. In fact, he has actually gone on record when I talked to him that he said he didn't really like that ride. He preferred the one he built over that one. And at the time, Spielberg was starting work on Jurassic Park. He had went to Bob Gurr first to say, hey, can we build full-size dinosaurs for this movie I'm working on? Now, Bob Gurr did come up with designs. He did come up with sketches, which I have seen, and they're absolutely brilliant. And he actually had a lot of input, and he was trying to be as creatively involved as possible. But his work ethic and a lot of, like, he had some complications with Spielberg, nothing argumentative or negative. They just had a different way of going about it. So because of his time schedule, he told Steven, listen, Steven, I don't know if I'll be able to do this full time, but I can redirect you to a guy who's a guy I've worked with in the past, who actually I think is an up and coming, I think he's a really brilliant guy, named Stan Winston. Now, that's how Stan Winston got the job, was because of Bob Gurr.
And and I love Stan Winston's work, and he also did the model for the earliest U.S. Godzilla design.
Yeah, the Stan Winston Godzilla. Like, I still want a toy of that. I would buy. That is the one Godzilla figure I would buy, is the Stan Winston design. I would be really interested to see him try to do a design of building an animatronic Kong. I'd be curious how he would pull that off.
Yeah. Maybe I should do a podcast episode about the earliest U.S. Unmade Godzilla films.
Hey, Godzilla 94, there you go.
Yeah, and yeah, I should definitely do a podcast episode about it.
From the director of Twister. That was the original plan. It was going to be the director of Twister.
Yeah, and yes. So, yeah. So, the one last thing I think there are one or two last things I want to talk about is the suit and the music. Where do you want to start first?
Let's go with the suit, because we're on topic with effects. That is Rick Baker, who got the gig immediately, because now the story is he had heard that they were going to do a remake, and he's like, oh, that's going to suck. I love the original. They're going to ruin it. It's going to be just like really bad. Now, when he was approached about it, of course he took the gig, because he thought, well, maybe I can actually try to make this work. This disaster that's coming, this disastrous piece of garbage, maybe I can make something out of it. So the first thing that happened was De Laurentiis's original plan was, let's make him a combination of an ape and a human. So he's going to look more like Bigfoot than he did Kong. And Rick Baker's like, hell no, you are not doing that to my boy. So when he was assigned to design the costume and the creature, the first thing he did was, when he got home, he took those designs De Laurentiis had and he burned them. He threw them in the garbage, and he said, wow, he does not know what he's talking about. Look, dumb shit, this is how you do it. And he literally did it independently, and he was actually in competition with Rambaldi, who was building his own suit. Eventually Baker won, and he wore the suit. Now, the suit was a collaboration between him and Rambaldi, reluctantly, I might add. He did not want to work with Rambaldi because he wanted to do his own thing, but it still worked as a combination. So the suit was mostly, it was foam. It was like an undersuit with foam, much like you would a bat suit. Now, what's interesting is, to get the jiggle in the suit, they actually filled the stomach and the chest with water-filled condoms. They had actually put them in the suit to give that jiggle. And then Rick Baker would obviously wear like black makeup around him so he could like hide his face in the mask. And then they would put the suit on, and then the mask was actually operated by bicycle controls, like wires that were actually wired from the back of the suit, would go underneath the foot. And so that there are some shots where that's why Kong kind of walks weird, because he had to be careful where he stepped, because the wires were actually going underneath his shoe to the operators off stage, right? That's how they worked. They didn't have radio control back then. And on top of that, the entire suit was not just latex, it was bear skin. They had used bear skin, like whereas the original used rabbit fur, this used bear skin. And apparently when you saw it out of like lighting, apparently the suit looked awful.
Yeah, I mean, but and let me tell you how my reactions about the suit. I mean, the suit looks amazing. I mean, it looked, especially the face, it looks so realistic, like a real ape. I mean, what I heard, I think they use 5 animatronic heads.
They had 5. Yeah, they had about 5 heads. They had an angry face. They had a regular basic. They had a stunt mask. They had different emotions. They had one for when he blows on Dwan. It was like, I think, some air-filled cheeks. So they had different mechanics for it. So they had different like facial things to bring, like masks to like make Kong's different features.
I mean, I don't know if you noticed, Jack, but when he blows air on Dwan after he washes her in the waterfall, I mean, when he does this,
yeah,
when he opens his mouth, I don't know if you look carefully in the mouth. I mean, I think you could see some sort of metal thing there. But
I'll have to watch it on Blu-ray and see if I can catch that. There are
but I'm not sure. But I thought I did capture something that's in the mouth. But
there are some continuity errors. I know if you watch the presentation scene and you see Rick Baker in the cage when the photographers are taking pictures, if you pause it at a certain frame, you could actually see the roof of the studio.
Yeah, the roof of the studio. It was so amazing. There
are some continuities. Again, it was the 70s at the time. You remember too, this was like 6 months before Star Wars. And the matte, like, it's all about the matte shots. And they were still, this is early blue screen, so they were still experimenting. Granted, we had come a long way since the horrendous blue screen of King Kong versus Godzilla. We have somewhat perfected it, but there is still some elements. Even watching the Blu-ray, I noticed with some of the blue screen, this is the sad part. And it's why I kind of don't like HD and 4K to a degree, because you start seeing the bleeding of the mats. You start seeing through the matte line. So you can see, like, in some shots when Rick brings his hand up, you actually can see through it. And I'm like,
yeah,
I don't like that, because I do like to see the original prints where it's less noticeable and like the grains taken off. So you just start, like, even watching King Kong Lives, I watched it on HD. And some of those shots in the plane, I realized, like, they were already looked bad, but there's 1 or 2 shots you could see right through the actors. I'm like, that's horrible.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, but I know I brought up about the heads, but they made like 2 suits for this. I mean, I know
they made, I think in total maybe about 4 suits, because of all the abuse and damage they would have gone through. And then they also had to build 2 for Rick and 2 for Will Shepherd, because it was just about how much abuse they could have taken in those costumes.
Yeah, because the reason I brought it up, because I know the one scene when Kong was swimming through the East River, and then when he comes out and he's struck by the power lines, the power cords, and
yeah, that was actually, there was a lot of safety concerns for Rick in the suit. Like, first of all, like, he actually suffered a bit of bodily damage doing this movie. He had to wear contact lenses that were full of like some sort of gelatin to make his eyes look great as they did. But every time he took them out, he would actually see halos and lights and everything, and he actually ended up like partially blind to a degree. But then on top of that, when they shot the World Trade Center scene, there was an accident where he was on the top of it, and a 2x4 from the stage came down on him. Now, he kept going, but for like 20 or 30 years, he didn't know this. He went to a doctor's 20, 30 years later, having some shoulder pains, and the doctor looked at it and they said, "Your shoulder's been broken." And he's like, "What? Like, how long have you had this shoulder injury?" It's like, "What shoulder injury?" "Dude, you broke your shoulder and it healed on its own. What happened?" And then he had to kind of think back, and he's like, "That freaking 2x4 that knocked me down." So when he did that scene, that 2x4 that came out, it broke his shoulder.
Wow.
And he didn't find out about that for like 20, 30 years.
That is like amazing. He didn't even know.
Not go through life realizing you broke your shoulder. Like, I'll just say this. behind the scenes wise, as I've been filming stuff for about a year, I've had a bit like my kneecap has not been the best. And I haven't gotten checked out yet because there's times it's fine. I think it's like a sore, but I would not be surprised if down the line they say you broke your kneecap. I'm like, what? Because I guess some bodily injuries you because it's not that painful. I guess you hardly notice it. So I guess for Rick Baker that was the case. So he did get a few injuries on this movie, and it was this is one of those things where it's like it was very hard. Now in that East River scene, he actually had to be held underwater by a couple of guys because the problem was the tank he was in was so deep. Had he gone any further down there, he could have drowned in the suit. So they had to have a couple of divers in the suit kind of hold him to make sure he didn't fall off the platform he was walking on. So there were a lot of different injuries. He was afraid of catching fire and this and that. There were some very raising concerns that Rick Baker had shooting.
Yeah, especially when after Kong came out of the water in the river, is electrocuted. I mean, that would be more dangerous because electricity and water.
It was rigged squibs. It was rigged explosions. To do that. Like, I mean, even like, and again, you bring up like multiple suits. Like, even when we did our remake, we invested in a few gorilla costumes because we didn't know how long the abuse in some of these suits would take. So we would if we started to see some rag on the old suits, we'd replace it with a new one. That is sort of a thing you got to do when you are shooting movies, is that you have to have multiple copies of the same prop or costume because you never know when like that piece is going to start showing wear and tear that you have to replace it.
Yeah. And so since we covered all that, I mean, let's talk about the last thing is the music by John Barry.
John Barry had started his work. I think he was mostly prominent for the James Bond theme. He created that. Now, what's interesting is that with the score, I love the score to this film.
Me too.
I'll say this, like when I started to get back into Kong and YouTube was starting up, and one of the first new Kongfrontation, like when YouTube started off, I immediately looked up Kongfrontation footage because I'm thinking I got to get my memories back. And there was one that was recorded in 93, but the video was timed to the De Laurentiis music, and it sounded great. And it was beautiful. Now, is it the Max Steiner score? No. The Max Steiner score will still be amazing and iconic. But again, much like the original and this remake, I do put the two together, and they kind of blend perfectly. You could literally create a playlist with the original and the 76 remake, and they kind of go hand in hand in a way. So with this, I do like Barry's use of the organs. Like the organ is like probably the best thing that he used in this score. It's very haunting.
Yeah, and I love the opening theme. I actually had the soundtrack of it on my phone that I can always listen into.
Yeah, it's a great score, and I know all we had for a while was the original album, but I think there was a recent release that had like the entire score put out there, and it had like even alternate cues and stuff like from the score that was never released, and even on the raw score, it sounds fantastic.
Yeah, like for the opening theme of it, I mean, and it always reminds me of Kongfrontation, the one in Florida, like because I watched some YouTube videos that they put the original theme opening.
That's the one I'm probably thinking of the same one. It was made in July '93, I think the date was on that recording.
Yeah, especially when they record outside of the ride with the banders and that theme was playing. But every time I listen to that theme on my phone, I mean, it always makes me think of that ride outside.
It takes you back.
Especially with the bander pictures.
Yeah, I'm like I feel like my thing isn't complete without that other banner.
Yeah,
I need to get that at some point. I probably need to get a copy from you.
Yeah, and if you want me to make you a copy of this one right behind me for G-Fest next year, I could totally make you a copy.
Ship it to me. I always like getting packages from fans. I've gotten a few actually. There's a fan from Sweden who sends me like Kong stuff, and what he does is he gets figures of Kong, but he puts it on like a display table, like a display wooden thing. I'm like, that's perfect. Like the stuff, so that's the kind of stuff I love receiving. So you can even do it that way, or G-Fest, or whichever works for you, man.
Yeah, and so we're just about almost wrap up. Is there anything in mind that you want to say something?
I mean, all I can say is like I've seen the movie numerous times, many times. The only time I've never seen it, and I would love to advocate for it, is to see it on the big screen. That's sort of my next mission, is to find a way to screen it. Now, it's interesting because I've gotten to know the people who run Revenue Cinema, which is an old theater here in Toronto. I might see about them getting a screening going because that would be great for next year.
Yeah.
But for me, yeah, it's like I've seen it in so many times. I at times quote it verbatim. The best line for me is just Fred Wilson, just when he's like preaching to the choir with his megaphone on the beach of Skull Island. And he's telling everybody what to do. And Roy Bagley's like, "You think that's really gonna? You think that's gonna ring the bell? Promise oil, bring back a monkey." And then for some reason, Fred Wilson is just speaking gibberish. I don't even know what he's saying, but it's so over the top and funny. He's like, "Look at that Exxon campaign. We'll put a tiger on your tank. And it's zillions. It's just a paper tiger." You're like, "What? I can't even understand what you're saying, you crazy maniac."
Yeah.
It's so random. It's like that line in Batman and Robin where it's poorly dubbed, where Arnold's like, "Then I will have Gotham for ransom, and lift the city down to my lands. It's winter for everything in Gotham." What are you saying? Stop speaking Austrian.
Yeah. Yeah, and that guy was coming and say, no matter where you go, I'll always find you.
No, that's I love that line. Wilson. And he's speaking like you're talking to the ball or Mr.
Yeah, from the TV.
It will cost the corporation billions. You can run, Wilson, but you can't hide. I don't care where you go in this world. Metro will find you. I don't care if you go to the moon. We'll find you. I love the over-the-topness of this movie. It's so funny.
Yeah. And then...
Wilson, hold the damn thing. Dump the chloroform. 6 of my guys are cut off in the bush, and you're building monkey traps. Jesus, Wilson, you're playing with their lives. Don't worry about it, Captain.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, this is one of my favorite Kong films of all time, and is one of my first ones I ever watched from my childhood and all that. So yeah, this film is a good film, and I know some people said it's not a good remake, but to me it's a really good one. I give this one like 9 out of 10.
It's still a 10. It's tied with the original. Like, you have changed, because the thing is, for a while, I feel like ever since I came into the picture, before that, I feel like a lot of people hated this. But the love for this is really still popular when you go to conventions. And I've had this happen. And fans of this movie want me to sign their Blu-rays. I had that happen at a con in South Carolina. And I was like, okay, I probably changed the opinion about this movie for the better.
Yeah.
For a while, it got so much hate. And because of my voice coming out, I'd say I probably changed opinions. And people are like, "Oh, it's not as bad. This guy actually says it's got some value." I'm like,
yeah,
all right.
And I know some non-Kong fans that said it's not a good one, especially King Kong Liz. People really hate this one, but I don't hate the sequel too. I like it too.
I feel like there was some hate prior to it, but then I feel like the hate really took off after Peter Jackson's remake came out. Once that came out and was praised, everybody said, "The one from the 70s, that one sucked." But now, like, obviously with the passage of time and with the internet, like, their voices are being heard, and actually it's changing opinions saying, "Oh, that actually wasn't as bad as I remember it being." We had some guy here in the comments who apparently saw it when it came out, and he said, "I still love it, like, since it came out." I'm like, okay, wow, you're lucky. You saw that in theaters. So
yeah, and let's hope that this film would re-release in theaters someday in the future. I mean, probably.
I wouldn't count for like a long-winded 2-week campaign, but at least like a sort of like a what is it, a phantom screening? That'd be nice if we got a phantom screening.
I'm just saying, if they release it maybe in 2 years for the 76th anniversary year.
50th anniversary, yeah, because you know what? What scares me is next year Jaws turns 50.
Yeah.
The following year Kong turns 50, and then the year after that Star Wars turns 50.
Wow. Maybe I could do a Jaws podcast somewhere next year Well,
You got to get JT is Reborn on that because he is an avid fan of Jaws. Like he can quote that movie inside out.
yeah, maybe I can have him on my, or maybe
I'll
with
recommend it to
some
you.
of the gang.
Yeah, I recommend that to you because he's great. He's obsessed with Jaws. He loves it. Like I love Jaws too. Like Jaws is like
Me
my
too.
number third favorite film, but like he's like obsessed with Jaws.
Yeah, believe me, I was a Jaws fan myself growing up, and I just saw this in theaters back in July before G
I need to see
Fest.
it in theaters. That's on my list to see that in cinemas.
That's only like a big screen event.
We're probably it's interesting because like I'm gonna try to go to G Fest next year, but what I'm more interested in is I might go to Martha's Vineyard next year where they film the movie because I'm thinking they're probably gonna do some event for its 50th anniversary. So why not go to the place where the movie was filmed?
Yeah, good idea. And
yeah.
So that's just about wrapped it up. So I want to say to you, Jack, thank you so much for joining me on this. I'm really looking forward to this. You are a very special guest on my very special episode. I mean, and so yeah, I'm glad I have you on it to talk about this classic remake. And
where's the poster? This that one there, actually, the poster there, that's autographed by two of the actors on the film. Rene Auberjonois, he signed that for me, and also Peter Cullen signed it because he, I forgot to mention this, was the voice of Kong for a brief period of time in this movie. A lot of the vocals that weren't the roar, that was Peter Cullen, the guy who did Optimus Prime.
Wow.
Yeah, so the guy who ended up going like, "My name is Optimus Prime," did all the vocals of Kong in that film.
Well, and I thought Kong I thought they used Stalk War from this movie called The Land Unknown.
They did, but like to get those, so like a lot, you know how like, so in the original film, it's, a tiger word played backwards, but then a lot of the love grunts that he does, it's like, rum, rum. That was Murray Spivak just doing that in his hand. So the same applied here. They had a roar, but they needed those grunts. And so the grunts you hear of, like, whenever you hear Kong go, or something like that, like those little like breathings and those little like growls or like stuff like that.
Wow.
That's Peter Cullen doing that stuff.
Wow. I did not notice that.
He was also the voice of the Predator.
That's awesome. And yeah, I got to do more research about these stuff. And
well, my channel's there for it, man. I've got tons of videos about this stuff. If you go watch my King's Gauntlet arc, that's a good place to start because we actually went to some of the places they filmed the movies where we found some stuff, artifacts are all spread out through those videos.
Yeah, and it's well, Jack, once again, I want to say thank you so much for joining me, and I love to talk about this film. So the next Kong episode will be King Kong Lives, the sequel that took place 10 years later.
Which isn't that bad. I still enjoy it. I still have fun.
Yeah,
it's bad, but it's enjoyably bad.
Yeah, but luckily I got the Blu-ray of it. I mean,
same here. Yeah, I love how it uses the Japanese art.
Oh yeah, I noticed this was the Japanese.
Yeah, which I think, if I remember correctly, I think those movies were distributed by Toho.
Yeah, I think I did notice.
Yeah.
So that's just about wrap it up. So instead of saying sayonara like in my other previous episodes or goodbye, well, Jack, here's to the big one.